The Young and the Restless spoilers. Nate Hastings was unraveling. Slowly, quietly, beneath the layers of practiced professionalism and calm restraint, something inside him was starting to crack. He'd told himself he was strong enough to handle Audra Charles, that he could weather her unpredictability, her charm, her shifting loyalty. He had even convinced himself, at least for a time, that what she did in the name of strategy or Victor's orders was just that, business. Just a performance. But there was a limit to self-deception. And Kyle Abbott was that limit. It started with whispers, glances, and awkward silences. Then came the late-night strategy meetings, the deliberately vague text messages, the carefully placed excuses. Audra had dismissed it all, of course, insisting that her closeness to Kyle was purely tactical. "It's what Victor wanted," she had said, brushing a hand over Nate's chest, her voice honeyed but hollow. "I don't feel anything for him." But feelings weren't the problem. What broke Nate wasn't emotion, it was the physical betrayal. Because now, it wasn't just strategy. Audra had slept with Kyle. That one act severed something in Nate. His trust. His dignity. His patience. And yet, he didn't walk away. Not immediately. Not yet. Because the truth was, he didn't know how. Not when his own desires were spiraling in directions he couldn't explain. Claire Grace Newman had become a new kind of distraction. Sharp, aloof, unpredictable. She was younger, bruised by her past, still figuring out where she fit in this ruthless world, but there was a fire behind her eyes, the kind that pulled men in even as they told themselves to stay away. Nate had noticed it, and worse, he had started to crave it. Even Nikki Newman, still regal, still magnetic in her cool, unwavering grace, had entered Nate's thoughts more than once. And it terrified him. Because desire didn't care about logic. And his desires were now crossing generational lines, threatening to upend not just his relationship with Audra, but his entire standing in the Newman world. And then came the moment Audra played her final card. She arrived at Nate's office looking pale, her makeup barely concealing the redness around her eyes. Her usual confidence was gone, replaced by something fragile and unsteady. She didn't say a word. She simply extended her trembling hand and held out the sonogram. Nate froze. "What is this?" he asked, though he already knew. Audra said nothing. Her silence was the answer. He stepped forward, his fingers brushing the edge of the paper, and in that instant, a dozen thoughts collided in his mind. The cold room. The hum of machines. The blur of gray and black on the image. The single word printed in small, clinical font, pregnant. His breath caught in his throat. His pulse raced. Every betrayal he had felt seconds ago dissolved into something far more complicated. Rage gave way to confusion. Suspicion blurred with responsibility. Had this been her plan all along? Was this her way of anchoring herself to him, of winning back the ground she'd lost? Or was this real? "I didn't want to tell you like this," Audra whispered. "But I didn't know what else to do. You were slipping away." Nate stared at her, his expression unreadable. Behind his eyes, scenarios played like silent films on a loop. Was the baby his? Was this a lie? A manipulation? Or had she truly come to him in desperation, not calculation? "I don't even know what I feel right now," he said, his voice low. Audra's eyes filled again. "I just know I don't want to lose you." But Nate couldn't offer comfort, not this time. Because in his mind, a darker possibility was unfolding. If the child was his, everything would change. If it wasn't, and she was using it as leverage, then there would be no going back. Worse still, what if he didn't want this future at all? And amid that whirlwind of emotion, the image of Claire flashed again in his mind. Her stare. Her lips. The possibility of something newer, freer, untainted by the lies he now found himself drowning in. And with it came shame. "You should go," Nate said quietly, placing the sonogram on the table without looking at her. "Nate," she tried, stepping forward. "I need time." Audra stood frozen. Then she slowly turned, gathering the paper back in her hands like it was something sacred. And when the door closed behind her, Nate sat down, his fingers pressed to his forehead, trying to understand whether he had just lost control of his life, or had never had it to begin with. Nate Hastings did not raise his voice, did not pace, did not fling accusations like knives. He simply stood very still, the way a surgeon stands when the noise of the room falls away and only the next, necessary action remains. He told Audra they would do this properly. No tears as evidence, no history as proof, no performance as substitute for truth. A real test, a reputable lab, full chain of custody from sample to result. "If this child is mine," he said, each word measured as if it might become part of a court record, "then I will show up every single day, with everything I am. But if it isn't, if you're using this to hold me here, then what you're really asking for is permission to keep lying. I won't grant it." The room seemed to tighten around them. Audra clutched the sonogram like a talisman and swore the baby was his, swore that whatever happened with Kyle had been tactical, ill-advised, and already over. She wanted belief to be a switch he could flip back on with one act of faith. But belief, once cracked, is a mosaic that never returns to a single pane. He laid out the terms as if negotiating a merger, a non-invasive paternity test if feasible, or a court-admissible one at birth, with counsel present, results shared simultaneously. He would pay for the test, for care, for whatever ensured safety and fairness, because whatever else he was, he refused to be the man who weaponized uncertainty against a woman and a pregnancy. He would not decide the future by rumor. Audra's reaction arrived in waves, shock at his composure, fury at his boundaries, then the hot tide of humiliation that comes when charm fails and leverage slips. She called him cruel. She called him small. She called him a coward hiding behind procedure. When none of that moved him, she reached for the oldest blade in Genoa City. "You're not worthy of being a father. I'll raise this child alone." For one long second he let the sentence sit, not because he accepted it, but because he refused to dignify it with immediate defense. Unworthy is the word meant to brand, to turn a man careful with facts into a man careless with love. He would not allow the imprint. "Insisting on the truth is not abandonment," Nate said quietly. "It's the foundation for every promise that comes after." The argument that followed had no choreography. It burned in jagged bursts, Audra insisting certainty where history denied it, Nate naming the nights that did not add up, the timelines that did, the silence that should not have. When he spoke Kyle's name, the air changed. Denial snapped into attack. She said he was insulting her, punishing her for one mistake while courting others of his own, pretending restraint while staring at Claire long enough to turn curiosity into heat. She was not wrong about his hunger, she was wrong about what should be done with it. He wrapped his shame in a simple truth: I will not build a life on a lie to avoid confronting my desire. And I will not call my desire love to excuse a lie. Somewhere outside the apartment, the city spun as usual, deliveries in alleys, deals in back rooms, a dozen grudges planning their grand returns, but inside, the future narrowed to 2 data points. A result that would set a course, and the conduct between now and then that would tell everyone who they really were. Nate messaged Michael Baldwin with a neutral line that carried the gravity of a subpoena: need a referral for a bulletproof paternity protocol, and within minutes had a path that neither party could later smear. He did not tell Victor. He did not tell Nikki. He did not tell Devon until after the appointment was booked, and when he did, Devon heard the fatigue beneath the formality and answered with the simple older brother sentence that has pulled men back from ledges for generations: stand on the truth and let it stand on you. Nate took the strength and put the phone face down. The news traveled anyway, not because either of them leaked it, but because Genoa City knows the geometry of scandal the way a musician knows scales. Someone saw Audra at her OB's office and texted the wrong friend. Someone else recognized Nate in a parking garage and connected it to the fight that bled through a door the day before, and Kyle, blessed and cursed with timing, realized the calendar of his own mistakes overlapped a little too neatly with the window in question. He had prepared for every retaliation but this one, that a night he'd justified as part strategy, part loneliness and part self-destruction might echo 9 months later in the cry of a child, or in a lab report that turned him into the city's latest cautionary tale. He poured a drink he did not want and stared at a phone he should not touch. He typed a message to Audra he would later delete, then another to Jack he could not send because his father was finally on the first vacation in years that looked like an attempt at peace. Nikki learned of it just as she was about to try, again, to convince Claire to meet Victor halfway. She felt the ground shift the way only women who've survived entire decades of shifting ground can feel it. Families break less from death blows than from the stress of long, unverified questions. She worried for the baby, for Nate's steadiness, for the way Audra weaponizes narrative when cornered, and she worried, too, for Claire, who had become the gravitational center of too many men's unresolved wants. She reminded herself to separate sins. Nate's insistence on a test was not the same as Nate's restless gaze. Audra's claim to certainty was not the same as evidence. Kyle's capacity for self-sabotage did not mean he deserved to be crucified for a child that might not be his. Compassion and clarity could occupy the same sentence if spoken by the right mouth. She drew a breath and decided hers would be that mouth, at least for tonight. Audra, left alone with the sonogram again, let the fury ebb and the fear speak. She knew the math. She knew there was a version of this where science crowned Nate the father and she could rebuild a fortress on top of his sense of duty. But she also knew the mirror. She knew there was a version where the printout delivered no leverage at all, only a second humiliation she would have to spin into martyrdom. That is when she reached for the story she had promised herself she would not tell, the one where she is already the hero and the mother and the wronged woman and the immaculate strategist who will raise a child without asking anyone for anything. I'll do it alone, she had said in the heat of the fight. Now she rehearsed it in the cool of the kitchen like a speech for donors. I chose the child. He chose his pride. Audra has always understood that in Genoa City, the first person to frame the narrative wins half the battle and the person who frames it best wins the rest. But even she could feel the danger of overplaying a hand the lab might later expose. Nate did not rehearse. He wrote a list. He is that kind of man when the storm hits, make a column for logistics and a column for conscience. Logistics, schedule, counsel, labs, timelines, privacy safeguards, a contingency plan if results leak, a plan for prenatal support that does not imply paternity but does honor humanity. Conscience, do not speak of Audra with contempt in rooms where contempt becomes policy. Do not use Claire as an alibi for leaving, or as a prize for proving a point. Do not mistake relief for righteousness if the child is not yours. If the child is yours, build a life that honors the fact that love must be taught, not assumed. He stared at the second column longer than the first. It is easier to be clean than to be kind, easier to be right than to be decent. He chose both, and chose to be watched while choosing. Claire heard pieces of the story at an angle, Nikki's cautious voice, Kyle's clumsy honesty, a text from a number Kane had seeded weeks ago just to watch the world tilt. She did not exult. If anything, the news threw gasoline on the dread she has been carrying, that she is the spark in too many rooms, that men keep turning toward her when what they should be turning toward is their own unfinished work. Nate's gaze had thrilled and scared her in equal measure, now it only unsettled. She walked the length of her apartment and promised herself a new posture. Do not be the echo chamber for other people's crises, do not be the reward for their courage arriving late, do not be the place men come to forget the messes they made elsewhere. If a child is coming into this world, the only vow that matters is the vow to tell that child the truth about the people who loved them and the people who only loved the way that child rearranged their power. By nightfall the lanes were drawn, a laboratory appointment on the calendar. Michael looped for process, not publicity. Devon informed enough to steady, not to steer. Nikki bracing 2 households with the tenderness of a woman who has learned tenderness is sometimes the only leadership that works. Kyle in a holding pattern between confession and collapse. Victor already sniffing for leverage he could pretend was concern. And Audra polishing a speech she might never need if the science breaks her way. The city did what it always does, leaned forward, waited for the envelope. So, is Nate an irresponsible father because he refused to accept a sonogram as scripture? No, the opposite. Responsibility begins where certainty starts, and certainty here demands verification. Love can walk beside that without losing its breath. And is Audra automatically lying because she has lied before? No, habits predict, they do not prove. The lab will speak. Between now and then, character will, too. Morning will come, and with it a result that will either chain two people together for life or cut them cleanly apart. If it is Nate's child, the next chapter becomes the hardest one, a fatherhood built in a house still smelling of smoke, a partnership renegotiated or retired, a man disciplining his own hunger while learning lullabies. If it is Kyle's, the city will rearrange itself around a new axis of consequence, and a woman famed for control will have to choose humility over spin. Either way, the price for last night's excitements arrives with the dawn. In Genoa City, the bill always does.